Welcome back. In this video, we build support frames underneath the stringer, which allows us to properly position the transom and the frames. If you're planning to build Temptress, this is my most useful video because without these support frames, I could not properly position the frames or the transom. And you can trust me on that because I'm now an official YouTube influencer. To install this first support structure, I had to remove the transom. After building the structure, we used a number of shims to ensure the stringers were snug and level. Notice the 2x4 that we placed between the stringers to keep the distance 28 inches apart. And the antique pipe clamp that held the stringers to the 2x4. On each side of the stringers, guides were screwed into the structure to keep the stringers 14 inches off center. With the back end of the boat sturdy and square, we move on to the stringers at frames 10 and 11. The vertical distance from the chine flats to the waterline is 43 1/8 inch on frames 10 and on frame 11. In fact, it's the same distance on frames 12 and 13 because of the back of the boat is completely parallel. I struggled to align my chine flat because not only were my stringers wobbly, the port side stringer was sagging. The process to create the support structure is the same at frames 10 and 11 as it was at the transom. The starboard stringer is 53.5 inches from the floor. So I somehow need to jack this side up by about 1/4 inch so I'm not flush here, so I gotta figure this one out. And I don't want to jack. This is really quite interesting. While this is level, look at the gap underneath here. So my stringer is bowing. So that is why I need to lift this up by about a little over 1/4 inch. Since I didn't own a jack, I turned around my 600-pound trigger clamps and put them on the scrap pillars and used them to jack up the stringer. While not perfectly straight, the port side stringer is now stable and level. On the starboard side, I add shims and ensure the support legs are perpendicular to the floor. I add some sideboards to my support frame, but I do kind of a sloppy job so that my friend will come back to help me out. Okay, so I'm going to try to explain what I've been doing here. By stabilizing the transom and the stringers here between frames 10 and 11, I was able to get everything nice and square, completely level. I've got my stringers from frame 10 through the back of the boat completely level. And now I have two frames that are nice and tight in here. And that's frames 10 and 11. As he said, I found out that the other side was sagging, so I had to jack it up. And I made sure these two frames are level, and I believe it is 43 1/8 inch, the chine flat above the water line. So worked really hard, got these two as my reference on both sides of the boat, 43 1/8 inch off the water line. I even put a keel in there to make sure that the keel slot was centered down the center of the boat. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to permanently bond these two onto the boat and use this as my reference plane to go all the way back. And what's super nice is to have this extra long plane that can go across all four of these. And you see that I'm actually pretty darn accurate. I probably need to make an adjustment to frame 12 when the time comes. But next step is to permanently bond frames 10 and 11 with thickened epoxy onto the stringer. So here I go. I start by wetting the mating surfaces with neat epoxy. And then apply a thick layer of epoxy thickened with the high density filler. For future frames, I think I'll add more filler to the epoxy. I reattach the Strongback legs to the Strongback. Finally, I did my best to fill the gap between the frame and the stringer with additional thickened epoxy. I cleaned up the excess epoxy and left it alone to cure overnight. Till next time, cheers.